get into the ring, kid, because it's time to punch out! One of my favorite game franchises of all time. Punch-Out is the seminal arcade boxing experience that blew me away when I first played the NES original at a friend's house decades ago. As everyone knows, the NES game was the first entry in the series, which was followed up by Super Punch-Out in the mid-90s and was finished off with a titanic star punch of quality with the Wii iteration that released in 2009. And that's pretty much Punch-Out in a nutshell, as there's not really that much more to talk about.
Hey, hold up, little man.
What?
Come on, kid. There's a lot more Punch-Out games you could train up on. Get back in the ring.
No, I covered the major ones. I think we're good.
I'll give you some chocolate.
What kind?
Doc.
What percentage?
70.
Okay.
Yeah! Good stuff, little Matt. Sting like a butterfly and turn into a caterpillar like a bee.
Okay, thanks, Doc. Anyway, yes, let's strap on those gloves and do this series some serious justice with a full Punch-Out retrospective. Okay, so earlier I lied, like a whole bunch, kinda. If you were a kid in the late 80s, you'd be excused if you assumed 1987's Punch-Out was an NES original, but it wasn't. It was actually an amalgamated port of the arcade versions that Nintendo first started to release way back in 1983. So if you weren't an arcade rat back then, you never would have known. Even at first glance though, you'll notice both games look almost nothing alike, as Nintendo was fairly prolific in the arcade scene at the time, and Punch-Out was quite a looker in '83. As you can see, the first true entry in the series is actually closer to '94's Super Nintendo version of the game, but with some key differences. You can't duck, and you lack a few special punches, but the entire game is wrapped in the audio soundscape of the NES, or rather this became the NES's, never mind. It's just such an odd mix that feels weird, like playing Zelda but having Metroid music overlaid. The other major difference is that this being an arcade game, it wasn't meant to be played for lengthy stretches, so you have a paltry selection of 6 boxers to battle. Glass Joe is represented as he should be, but he's then followed up by Piston Hurricane of all people. Beat him and you'll move on to series mainstay Bald Bull. Then things get, very 80s. Kid Quick makes his first and only appearance here, and yeah, for obvious reasons. Oh, but the stereotype train here is still chewing along, cause next we have Pizza Pasta, who may or may not be related to Leanna. Woof. These are 2 characters Nintendo has mysteriously never dredged up again. I don't think either of these guys will be spirits in Smash. Finally, we come to the champ and hardest fight of the game, Mr. Seng, looking pretty much like how he's supposed to. Oh, but there's one final character we haven't talked about. Challenger, who doesn't even get close to supposed to looking like anyone. Yes, Little Mac is not even a real boy yet, as he would arrive later and become the face of the series, for the most part. Right off the bat, to get around the problem of the player seeing the opponent's patterns and incoming attacks, Nintendo went with a weird wireframe sort of approach, which is why Mac gets this as an alt costume in Smash 4, despite Mac never actually getting this costume. This is Challenger's threads, man! Lay off. There's 2 more notable things to talk about with this first entry, with one of them being the music. Many Nintendo games have been notable for their amazing soundtracks, usually coming courtesy of such legends as Hip Tanaka and yes, Koji Kondo. In fact, this was Kondo's first game working under Nintendo, and his themes and fanfares stand the test of time to this day. Just like Mario or Zelda have all their famous motifs, Punch-Out has its own memorable soundscape. Now, the final thing of note is the display style of the monitors used for the arcade machines, as this was a choice that affected Punch-Out in a very understated way. Like I mentioned in the Did You Know Gaming episode on Punch-Out, check out the link in the description, Nintendo's factories in the early 80s had an influx of extra monitors. So to make the most of their stock, they were going to use as many of the screens as they could. So they came up with the idea to display the banners, round info, and portraits on the topmost screen and stack it onto the gameplay monitor. Man, that just looks like you're just playing on the DS. Almost as if they should have made a DS or 3DS version of the games.
Now, don't get too salty too early, little Matt. Save that for the second round, son.
Fine, okay. Anyway, that about covers the arcade version of the original Punch-Out. But weirdly enough, both a sequel and 2 spin-offs would get released even before Mike Tyson eventually hit the ring. So, just 1 year later in 1984, Nintendo released Punch-Out! Boxing for their plucky Game & Watch series of handhelds. For those that don't remember, Game & Watch was their series of handhelds before the Game Boy. And that's all I have to say about the things, honestly. Way before my time. Punch-Out for the Game & Watch is about as good as you can expect, as it shares more in common with the amazing Tiger electronic portables that would release years later. A printed background screen with a large animation cell plastered on top of it with each image lighting up to crudely imply movement. You seemingly control 2 little Macs or challengers as they fight one-on-one for all eternity. Strange that the game has so much horizontal space. I mean, this is a boxing. You kinda need to be close to each other for the sport to, work. And that's Punch-Out for the Game & Watch. Now, while that was underwhelming everyone across the globe, the same year a sequel to the original arcade smash came out in the form of Super Punch-Out! But again, not the Super Punch-Out we got on the SNES. I'll get to that later. So Punch-Out the Second, featuring Arcade, is a lot like its predecessor, but features a different roster of gladiators from the World Video Boxing Association to throw down with. The ability to duck certain attacks was also added, but aside from that, the game mostly stayed the same. The new boxers were the burly Canadian bear hugger, martial arts expert Dragon Chan, totally not at all, poorly named at all, Vodka Drakensky, the mystic champion of India, Great Tiger, and the ultimate example of an exquisite Adonis, Super Macho Man, who just happens to be the champion of the goddamn world. And that's it. There's actually less boxers here than there was in the first arcade Punch-Out. I guess since they only had 1 year between releases, there wasn't time to add more. And unlike the first arcade game, which got a Switch port via Hamster, Super Punch-Out never got a home release, and while it's a marginally improved sequel, it did give us a good selection of new boxers that would go on to be expected in future releases. Another year later, 1985 brought us the spin-off game of the series and the last arcade game Nintendo would fully develop and release themselves. Here comes Arm Wrestling. Much like its pugilistic sibling series, Arm Wrestling had you going arm to arm with a variety of colorful characters, including such luminaries as the Stud Horse Texas Mac, Sumo Wrestler Kabuki, which is a pretty confusing name and also a decent case for Nintendo to sue Capcom when E-Honda came around years later. Then we have the awesome Mask X, who is a mysterious— oh no! It's actually Bald Bull. Ha ha ha! Get out of here, you scamp. Then we come to who I think might be the greatest character Nintendo has ever come up with. Lazy, uninspired designs like Link or Samus pale in comparison to the good friends, Alice and Ape the Third. Just look at this. Why couldn't they have moved over to Punch-Out? What we have here is a cybernetic ape, designed only to crush his opponent's arms and souls, being controlled by a nerdy 80s girl wonder kid. To hell with your Waluigi, Alice and Ape the Third for Smash! Things then get even stranger, but not really stranger, as the arm wrestling champ, who also happens to be a reanimated corpse with the name of Frank Jr., finally steps on stage to burn some muscle. Beat him, and the carny indie promoter then throws a massive sack of cash on you. Also risque for Nintendo, but a lovely ring girl shows up at the start of every match, which would have made a bit more sense in a boxing game, but I digress. Arm wrestling, again, never got any home ports, and it's the type of machine that would break down often. I've never seen a functioning one out in the wild, and I've been to Galloping Ghost a few times. Still, it's a fun curio in the history of Punch-Out! Okay, finally, we are entering 1987, one of the most important years in gaming ever. Mega Man, Contra, Final Fantasy, Street Fighter, and Metal Gear all debuted for the first time in this magical year. And while Nintendo had also just released a sequel to the original Zelda, they had one more important release: Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Now, we are moving into a triple main event here, aka no main event, as this marks the first entry in the series that most people played and/or started with, which was then followed up by two notable sequels. Genyo Takeda was responsible for producing the arcade versions of Punch-Out, but was then tasked with eventually bringing the concept to the NES, the woefully underpowered NES. Takeda quickly realized that it would be impossible to emulate the arcade's graphics and perspective on the machine, so he set about changing as many things as he could to make it work while still keeping the spirit of the arcade alive. He increased the size of the ring and shrunk the player character down, giving him a scrappy sort of feel as he would need to jump high to connect punches to faces. The power meter was ditched, and now special star punches could only be earned if you hit your opponents in specific weak spots or tells that they would all exhibit during a bout. A stamina system was also introduced, which would decrease if you whiffed your attacks, and you'd gas out for a few seconds as punishment. Takeda also realized he would need to make the game a lot harder to maximize the player's time, since this was a home version and the original could be beat incredibly quickly and only featured that handful of opponents. This time, Challenger, well now named Little Mac, obviously inspired by Rocky Balboa, faces 14 different bouts composed of a mix of boxers from both arcade versions, while cutting a few and adding some more just for this version. First, we have Glass Joe, newcomers Von Kaiser, Piston Honda, Don Flamenco, and King Hippo, followed up by Great Tiger and Bald Bull. A rematch with Honda, then a showdown with the newly named Soda Popinski, which I think is a far more charming gimmick than, being an alcoholic. Two more rematches with Bald Bull and Flamenco before facing down a gauntlet of killers with former world champs Mr. Seng, Super Macho, and that's it. Yes, originally NES Punch-Out ended with a fight against the Macho One, and would have remained so. While the game's Japanese version was pretty much complete and was even given out as a prize in gold cartridge form at a golf tournament, the US release was still being worked on. Nintendo of America's founder, Minoru Arakawa, just happened to be in attendance at a Mike Tyson match in '86, and was blown away by his skill in the ring. Inspired, he then brokered a deal for a 3-year license to Tyson's appearance in the game as the final boss. This proved to be really beneficial for Nintendo, as Tyson won the heavyweight championship later that year. So, when the newly dubbed Mike Tyson's Punch-Out appeared on store shelves less than 9 months later, Nintendo had the current champ hawking their game. This deal only initially covered North America and Europe, so the Japanese version, sans Mike Tyson, released officially as Punch-Out! A month or so before the rest of the world. When the Tyson version proved to be a sales knockout, however, Nintendo quickly relocalized it to feature the iconic champ for the Famicom. Then, for a number of years, it was assumed that Tyson's likeness was taken out for the re-release, Punch-Out featuring Mr. Dream, due to his criminal conviction in 1991. But the Mr. Dream version came out a year before simply because the deal between Nintendo and Tyson had expired. The 3 years were up. Nintendo could have renegotiated if they wanted, but in their home country of Japan in 1990, Tyson lost the big championship to one Buster Douglas. So yeah, Nintendo wasn't re-upping nothing. As for Mr. Dream himself, a generic-looking smiling babyface that's a simple edit of Tyson's sprite, and while he's just as hard, he actually has the best record in Punch-Out history, even beating out Iron Mike. Whoa, fuck you. Aside from all that, it was this release that really cemented the Punch-Out style gameplay that we know and love today. Each boxer was given a lot of personality, and therefore their fights became almost puzzle-like in how you defeat them. The arcade versions were a bit more simple in how you approach things, and the NES version thankfully didn't have that garbled speech that needed to announce each and every one of the punches that gets thrown.
Body blow! Body blow! Body blow! Body blow! Body blow!
It also fleshed out the world a little better, having Little Mac's home turf be New York City and seeing it in the backgrounds, and giving him good old Doc Lewis as a trainer really gave the game more atmosphere than prior releases.
Woo! That's right, baby!
Okay, for years, additional layers of depth, strategy, and secrets would be uncovered in the game, as it was packed with tiny details and things easily missed. It would be little wonder why this is the version of Punch-Out that would go on to represent the series. That wouldn't happen until much later though, and the time between releases in the Punch-Out series would get longer and longer. So it wasn't until 1994, where the Super Nintendo was in full swing, that Nintendo released, yes, Super Punch-Out, which had a lot more in common with the arcade versions like I outlined before. Thankfully though, it also borrowed some things that they learned from the NES original. Returning is the arcade's more behind-the-back perspective, but instead of having that weird wireframe, the Super Nintendo could handle full transparencies, further proving that Nintendo does what Jenna don't. You can now weave and dodge in almost any direction with no stamina governing it, and a few new special attacks like rapid punches were added. The roster was also increased considerably, with a bunch of familiar faces mixed in with a lot of new ones, totaling 16 unique bouts. They are divided by a variety of circuits that all have sick-ass logos I used to draw on my math books in school. These include the minor, major, world, and special circuits, with each one getting harder as the last fight always had you facing off against the champ of that circuit. Starting with the minor leagues, a new loser was brought in to replace Glass Joe in the form of Gabby J. Piston Hurricane and Bear Hugger returned from the both arcade versions respectively, and finally Bald Bull, the only Punch-Out pugilist to appear in every mainline game in the series. Well, yeah, unless you don't count the Game & Watch version, which I don't. The major circuit is comprised of Bob Charlie, Dragon Chan, Masked Muscle, and
Mr. Sandman.
The world circuit starts off light with Aaron Ryan, but quickly ramps up with Hikeki Gagero, Mad Clown, who is a clever reworking of Bear Hugger's sprite, but with tons of new moves, before capping off with Super Macho Man. Then, after all these lightweights have been KTFO'd, we get the Killer's Road that is the special circuit. This blood-soaked kumite consists of snooty college prodigy Narcissus Prince, cheating old man Hoy Quarlo, who's just bringing straight-up weapons into the ring, and finally, the deadly duo of Rick and Nick Bruiser. Probably the most intimidating fighters of the series. Certainly more than Mr. Dream, I think. As you can see, this is a much more elaborate game than a simple port of the arcade versions, with over 60% of the roster being brand new. And while it lacks some of the aesthetics of the NES with no Doc Lewis, training scenes and the like, it makes up with it in a more important area, the gameplay. Boxer patterns and strategies lean towards the NES side, with more wacky gimmicks, weaknesses, and pitch-perfect timing over the arcade's more simplified style. There's a constant debate over which Punch-Out is better. Personally, in terms of playing it, I prefer Super, but the characters, charm, and especially the music of NES Punch-Out, I feel is more memorable. Now, while this game was released in North America in 1994, for whatever reason, Japan did not see a release until 1998, almost 2 years after the Nintendo 64 hit shelves.
Available for your home in 1995, only on Nintendo Killer Instinct.
How is that possible, you ask? Well, the Super Famicom had the ability to play downloaded games that could be copied onto blank carts via the Nintendo Power Stations, basically kiosks you'd find in stores that print the data onto your carts. This was the only place to play Super Punch-Out at the time if you were a Japanese fan. Bizarre. Speaking of bizarre, well, see, there's not that many controversies per se for the Punch-Out franchise, but this is certainly one of them. Who is Johnny No Eyebrows here? In the game itself, he's never actually referred to as Little Mac, but in some US marketing materials, he was. In Fight Night 2 for the GameCube, this character, and Super Punch-Out itself, was an unlockable extra for Nintendo fans. As for the actual in-game model, I mean, it's terrible, but on a shorts is written Mac. But the game was made by EA, so take that for what you will. Some Punch-Out fans feel because it's a third-party game and a cameo, it's distinctly non-canon. To make matters worse, the Virtual Console re-release of Super Punch-Out on the Wii has a description page that does indeed state the character in this game is known as Little Mac, and that was in 2007. In 2009, one of the main designers at Next Level Games who developed Punch-Out Wii stated that the blonde boxer is not the Mac we know. One other possible theory that I personally like is that Super Punch-Out is a sequel that takes place a few years later and just features another young up-and-coming boxer who is also named Mac. There's not much fighter overlap between this game and the NES version, with only Mr. Sandman, Macho, and Bald Bull being the common threads. So, it's plausible the original Little Mac retired at an early age as champion, was defeated by Nick Bruiser, and just older guys like Sandman are just still kicking around, clinging to their glory days. This is all, though, thrown for a loop, however, when you consider that the beta footage of Super Punch-Out showed a completely different design for your boxer, featuring short black hair and a different face that, while not exactly the same, is far closer to the Mac we're familiar with. Why they changed this at the last minute is anyone's guess. You know, someone bug Ken Lobb about this on Twitter or something. Nintendo of Japan themselves, as far as I know, have never weighed in on this epic Mac vs. Mac war. But in recent years, they've made it pretty clear that his look from the NES game is the OG, with him appearing in Smash as a trophy, eventual fighter, and his cameo in Captain Rainbow, if that means anything to anyone. I don't think the SNES guy is gonna get his own amiibo anytime soon. Speaking of Mac cameos, that's what the Punch-Out series was relegated to for 15 years, as Nintendo went 2 entire console generations without an appearance by our plucky pugilist. During that time, however, lots of pretenders tried to, punch above their weight class. Oh, I've been hanging on to that one. On the Nintendo 64, the GameCube, and even a handheld or two. Ready to Rumble 1 and 2, Black and Bruised, Face Breakers KO Party, Wade Hickston's Counterpunch, even good old Hajime no Ippo all tried to be the new Punch-Out, either from a gameplay or style perspective. It wasn't until October of 2008, after a very tepid E3 for Nintendo, where they held a separate event that showed off both Sin and Punishment 2 and a brand new Punch-Out, which was dubbed Punch-Out. Not even Punch-Out Wii, just Punch-Out. That's fine, it was more or less a reboot than a sequel, as it chronicled Mac's rise to the top against an eclectic mix of favorites from all over the franchise, as well as some surprises. Made by Canadian developer Next Level Games, who also worked on Mario Strikers, Punch-Out Wii made people take notice with gorgeous animation and a silky smooth frame rate. It also featured a variety of ways to play the game, either with traditional buttons or motion controls, and even had a limited but fun multiplayer option. Doc Lewis was also back and essential to the game, as he could now provide a Coco-related boost in between rounds that would buff Mac's health. Punch-Out Wii combines the more intimate camera perspective and transparent Mac model from the Super Nintendo with the charm, aesthetics, and musical stylings of the NES, a perfect marriage between the two. Stamina is back, along with star punches, and the familiar but fun puzzle-like nature of the bouts returned full force, but with a fresh and wacky coat of paint. The game featured 13 fights, which was less than the previous one, but you know, the lineup is killer. Glass Joe, Von Kaiser, Disco Kid, the one new boxer of the bunch, and King Hippo mark the first wave Mac must defeat. We then move on to Piston Hondo, a name change I assume because Nintendo was afraid a car company might get all lawsuity on them. Bear Hugger is next, brimming with more personality because of the Canadian connection with himself and Next Level, because yes, we all just drink maple syrup by the gallon. Great Tiger returns with far more reality warping tricks than he had last time before Don Flamenco caps off the second circuit. Aaron Ryan makes a surprise appearance from Super Punch-Out and is now the unhinged maniac, which I think is a big improvement. And then we get smacked by a deluge of heavy hitters in the form of Soda Popinski, Bald Bull, and finally, the Super Macho Man. But who would be the champ Mac has to take down this new entry? Somehow I don't think Tyson was in the running. So it could be A, bland babyface Mr. Dream, B, Nick Bruiser, or C, a new guy. Well, the answer was none of them, as Next Level went a little different here and rebooted
Mr. Seng
to be younger, faster, and stronger than ever, sorta making him feel like Tyson in the process anyhow. Now, yes, while this is 3 less boxers than Super Punch-Out, Next Level more than makes up for this with Title Defense Mode. This was a kinda second quest where all the boxers you defeated would come back for another go, but this time aware of their weaknesses and have taken the appropriate steps to rectify them. Glass Joe wears headgear. King Hippo duct tapes a manhole to cover his belly welly, making each fight feel like a brand new thing, so it's easy to say the game offers 26 unique bouts. 27, of course, if you count the Banana Slammer. Multiplayer mode is, like stated before, a limited affair featuring only Mac vs. Mac fights, but it's still pretty fun for what it is. Giga Mac, of course, is the star of the show here, and that's further proven by his eventual inclusion as a final smash. I guess Nintendo was also afraid of a lawsuit if they called him Big Mac. Relaunching Punch-Out with such an old-school mentality, it's one of the more challenging first-party games on the Wii, and being based on a 30-year-old franchise that hasn't seen a game in half that time was a risk. Fortunately, due to a fun marketing campaign featuring lots of charming live-action bits and great reviews, the game was a success and sold well over 1 million copies, and even received a reprint as a Nintendo Select title. It also got a port to the Wii U eShop in 2015, allowing even more people to experience the sweet, sweet science that is over-the-top cartoony boxing. This version of Punch-Out also had a lot of things left on the cutting room floor, with Next Level and producer Kensuke Tanabe saying things like RPG elements, minigames, and even online multiplayer were considered for a time. Maybe one of those ideas were reused for the last notable release in the franchise, Doc Lewis's Punch-Out.
Oh yeah! Now it's my time to shine. Put 'em up, kid! Put 'em up!
Released a few months after the main game, it was a WiiWare title that started as a platinum reward for Club Nintendo members, so not that many people ever had the pleasure to spar with Doc. It's basically a series of 3 fights that get harder every time, and Doc, Mr. Lewis if you're nasty, is no pushover. It's a shame it was such an exclusive feature or wasn't added to the main game to begin with, as it's a really fun distraction and Doc's interactions with Mac are so precious and wholesome. That marks the last new official entry in the Punch-Out franchise, although Little Mac being added to the main Smash roster in 2014 can't be overstated, because while the series never achieved Mario or Zelda-like numbers, it's one of those very video gamey-like series that seemingly only Nintendo seems to put out anymore. Next Level Games hasn't announced a new project since 2016, so hopefully when they do unveil what they've been working on, it'll be Punch-Out related. The motion controls afforded by the Switch Joy-Cons would make this a simple fit, and hell, I'd be happy with an upscaled Punch-Out Wii with added new boxers and those minigames and RPG elements that were cut last time around. I think throughout the course of this retrospective, you can see why the series has endured. A simple concept that's immediately fun and accessible to learn, but an absolute monster to master. Featuring light, fun characters, bursting with personality, and that sorta, let me go again, gameplay loop as you try to unravel each mystery that's wrapped in a riddle, wrapped in boxing gloves. Punch-Out remains one of my most fondly remembered franchises that thankfully has aged incredibly well, and for that, I'll always be there to put on the gloves and go for one more round.
That's the spirit, little Matt. Never give up.